Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents The Road Not Taken, Finding America in the poem everyone loves and almost everyone gets wrong, by David Orr, narrated by Paul Boehmer. Introduction. A young man hiking through a forest is abruptly confronted with a fork in the path. He pauses, his hands in his pockets, and looks back and forth between his options. As he hesitates, images from possible futures flicker past. The young man wading into the ocean, hitchhiking, riding a bus, kissing a beautiful woman, working, laughing, eating, running, weeping. The series resolves at last into a view of a different young man with his thumb out on the side of a road. As a car slows to pick him up, we realize the driver is the original man from the crossroads, only now he's accompanied by a lovely woman and a child. The man smiles slightly, as if confident in the life he's chosen, and happy to lend that confidence to a fellow traveler. As the car pulls away and the screen is lit with gold, for it's a commercial we've been watching, the emblem of the Ford Motor Company briefly appears. The advertisement I've just described ran in New Zealand in 2008, and it is, in most respects, a normal piece of smartly assembled and quietly manipulative product promotion. But there is one very unusual aspect to this commercial. Here is what is read by a voiceover artist in the distinctive vowels of New Zealand as the young man ponders his choice. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better climb, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. It is, of course, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. In this commercial, this fact is never announced. The audience is expected to recognize the poem unaided. For any mass audience to recognize any poem is, to put it mildly, unusual. For an audience of car buyers in New Zealand to recognize a 100-year-old poem from a country 8,000 miles away is something else entirely. But this isn't just any poem. It's The Road Not Taken, and it plays a unique role not simply in American literature, but in American culture and in world culture as well. Its signature phrases have become so ubiquitous, so much a part of everything from coffee mugs to refrigerator magnets to graduation speeches, that it's almost impossible to forget the poem is actually a poem. In addition to the Ford commercial, The Road Not Taken has been used in advertisements for Mentos, Nicorette, the multi-billion-dollar insurance company AIG, and the job search website Monster.com, which deployed the poem during Super Bowl 34 to great success. Its lines have been borrowed by musical performers, including, among many others, Bruce Hornsby, Melissa Etheridge, George Strait, and Talib Kweli, and it's provided episode titles for more than a dozen series, including Taxi, The Twilight Zone, and Battlestar Galactica, as well as lending its name to at least one video game, Spry Fox's Road Not Taken, a roguelike puzzle game about surviving life's surprises. As one might expect, the influence of The Road Not Taken is even greater on journalists and authors. Over the past 35 years alone, language from Frost's poem has appeared in nearly 2,000 news stories worldwide, which yields a rate of more than once a week. In addition, The Road Not Taken appears as a title, subtitle, or chapter heading in more than 400 books by authors other than Robert Frost on subjects ranging from political theory to the impending zombie apocalypse. At least one of these was a massive international bestseller, M. Scott Peck's self-help book, The Road Less Traveled, A New Psychology of Love, Traditional Values, and Spiritual Growth, which was originally published in 1978 and has sold more than 7 million copies in the United States and Canada. Given the pervasiveness of Frost's lines, it should come as no surprise that the popularity of The Road Not Taken appears to exceed that of every other major 20th century American poem, including those often considered more central to the modern and modernist era. Admittedly, the popularity of poetry is difficult to judge. Poems that are attractive to educators may not be popular with readers, so the appearance of a given poem in anthologies and on syllabi doesn't necessarily reveal much. And book sales indicate more about the popularity of a particular poet than of any individual poem. But there are at least 2 reasons to think that The Road Not Taken is the most widely read and recalled American poem of the past century, and perhaps the adjective American could be discarded. The first is the Favorite Poem Project, which was devised by former poet laureate Robert Pinsky. Pinsky used his public role to ask Americans to submit their favorite poem in various forms. The clear favorite among more than 18,000 entries was The Road Not Taken. The second, more persuasive reason comes from Google. Until it was discontinued in late 2012, a tool called Google Insights for Search allowed anyone to see how frequently certain expressions were being searched by users worldwide over time and to compare expressions to one another. Google normalized the data to account for regional differences in population, converted it to a scale of 1 to 100, and displayed the results so that the relative differences in search volume would be obvious. Here is the result that Google provided when The Road Not Taken and Frost were compared with several of the best-known modern poems and their authors, all of which are often taught alongside Frost's work in college courses on American poetry of the first half of the 20th century. Search terms: Road Not Taken and Frost. Scaled worldwide search volume, 48. Wasteland and Eliot, 12. Prufrock and Eliot, 12. This Is Just to Say and Carlos Williams, 4. Station of the Metro and Pound, 2. According to Google, then, The Road Not Taken was, as of mid-2012, at least 4 times as searched as the central text of the modernist era, The Wasteland, and at least 24 times as searched as the most anthologized poem by Ezra Pound. By comparison, this is even greater than the margin by which the term college football beats archery and water polo. Given Frost's typically prickly relationship with almost all of his peers, he once described Ezra Pound as trying to become original by imitating somebody that hasn't been imitated recently. One can only imagine the pleasure this news would have brought him. But as everyone knows, poetry itself isn't especially widely read. So, perhaps being the most popular poem is like being the most widely requested salad at a steakhouse. How did The Road Not Taken fare against slightly tougher competition? Better than you might think. Search terms: Road Not Taken and Frost. Scaled worldwide search volume 47. Like a Rolling Stone and Dylan 19. Great Gatsby and Fitzgerald 17. Death of a Salesman and Miller 14. Psycho and Hitchcock 14. The results here are even more impressive when you consider that The Road Not Taken is routinely misidentified as The Road Less Traveled, thereby reducing the search volume under the poem's actual title. For instance, a search for Frost's poem, The Road Less Traveled, produces more than 200,000 results, none of which would have been counted earlier. Frost claimed his goal as a poet was to lodge a few poems where they will be hard to get rid of. With The Road Not Taken, he appears to have lodged his lines in granite. On a word-for-word basis, it may be the most popular piece of literature ever written by an American. And almost everyone gets it wrong. This is the most remarkable thing about The Road Not Taken. Not its immense popularity, which is remarkable enough, but the fact that it is popular for what seem to be the wrong reasons. It's worth pausing here to underscore a truth so obvious that it is often taken for granted. Most widely celebrated artistic projects are known for being essentially what they purport to be. When we play White Christmas in December, we correctly assume that it's a song about memory and longing centered around the image of snow falling at Christmas. When we read Joyce's Ulysses, we correctly assume that it's a complex story about a journey around Dublin as filtered through many voices and styles. A cultural offering may be simple or complex, cooked or raw, but its audience nearly always knows what kind of dish is being served. Frost's poem turns this expectation on its head. Most readers consider The Road Not Taken to be a paean to triumphant self-assertion. I took the one less traveled by. But the literal meaning of the poem's own lines seems completely at odds with this interpretation. The poem's speaker tells us he shall be telling, at some point in the future, of how he took the road less traveled by, yet he has already admitted that the two paths equally lay in leaves, and the passing there had warned them really about the same. So, the road he will later call less traveled is actually the road equally traveled. The two roads are interchangeable. According to this reading, then, the speaker will be claiming, ages and ages hence, that his decision made all the difference, only because this is the kind of claim we make when we want to comfort or blame ourselves by assuming that our current position is the product of our own choices, as opposed to what was chosen for us or allotted to us by chance. The poem isn't a salute to can-do individualism. It's a commentary on the self-deception we practice when constructing the story of our own lives. The Road Not Taken may be, as the critic Franklin Tricchia memorably put it, the best example in all of American poetry of a wolf in sheep's clothing. But we could go further. It may be the best example in all of American culture of a wolf in sheep's clothing. In this it strongly resembles its creator. Frost is the only major literary figure in American history with two distinct audiences, one of which regularly assumes that the other has been deceived. The first audience is relatively small and consists of poetry devotees, most of whom inhabit the art form's academic subculture. For these readers, Frost is a mainstay of syllabi and seminars, and a regular subject of scholarly articles, though he falls well short of inspiring the interest that Ezra Pound and Wallace Stevens enjoy. He's considered bleak, dark, complex, and manipulative, a genuine poet's poet, not a historical artifact like Longfellow or a folk balladeer like Carl Sandburg. While Frost isn't the most esteemed of the early 20th century poets, very few dedicated poetry readers talk about him as if he wrote greeting card verse. Then there is the other audience. This is the great mass of readers at all age levels who can conjure a few lines of The Road Not Taken and Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and possibly Mending Wall or Birches, and who think of Frost as quintessentially American in the way that amber waves of grain are quintessentially American. To these readers, or so the first audience often assumes, he isn't bleak or sardonic, but rather a symbol of Yankee stoicism and countrified wisdom. This audience is large. Indeed, the search patterns of Google users indicate that, in terms of popularity, Frost's true peers aren't Pound or Stevens or Eliot, but rather figures like Pablo Picasso and Winston Churchill. Frost is not simply that rare bird, a popular poet. He is one of the best-known personages of the past 100 years in any cultural arena. In all of American history, the only writers who can match or surpass him are Mark Twain and Edgar Allan Poe, and the only poet in the history of English-language verse who commands more attention is William Shakespeare. This level of recognition makes poetry readers uncomfortable. Poets, we assume, are not popular, at least after 1910 or so. If one becomes popular, then either he must be a second-tier talent catering to mass taste, as Sandburg is often thought to be, or there must be some kind of confusion or deception going on. The latter explanation is generally applied to Frost's celebrity. As Robert Lowell once put it, Robert Frost at midnight, the audience gone, to vapor, the great act laid on the shelf in mothballs. The great act is for the audience of ordinary readers, but his true admirers know better. He is really a wolf, we say, and it is only the sheep who are fooled. It's an explanation that Frost himself sometimes encouraged, much as he used to boast about the trickiness of The Road Not Taken in private correspondence. I'll bet not half a dozen people can tell who was hit and where he was hit by my Road Not Taken, he wrote to his friend, Louis Untermeyer. In this sense, the poem is emblematic. Just as millions of people know its language about the road less traveled, without understanding what that language is actually saying, millions of people recognize its author without understanding what that author was actually doing. But is this view of The Road Not Taken and its creator entirely accurate? Poems, after all, aren't arguments. They are to be interpreted, not proven, and that process of interpretation admits a range of possibilities, some supported by diction, some by tone, some by quirks of form and structure. Certainly it's wrong to say that The Road Not Taken is a straightforward and sentimental celebration of individualism. This interpretation is contradicted by the poem's own lines. Yet, it's also not quite right to say that the poem is merely a knowing literary joke disguised as shop-worn magazine verse that has somehow managed to fool millions of readers for 100 years. A role too artfully assumed ceases to become a role and instead becomes a species of identity, an observation equally true of Robert Frost himself. One of Frost's greatest advocates, the scholar Richard Poirier, has written with regard to Frost's recognition among ordinary readers that there is no point trying to explain the popularity away, as if it were a misconception prompted by a pose. By the same token, there is no point in trying to explain away the general misreadings of The Road Not Taken, as if they were a mistake encouraged by a fraud. The poem both is and isn't about individualism, and it both is and isn't about rationalization. It isn't a wolf in sheep's clothing so much as a wolf that is somehow also a sheep, or a sheep that is also a wolf. It is a poem about the necessity of choosing that somehow, like its author, never makes a choice itself, that instead repeatedly returns us to the same enigmatic, leaf-shadowed crossroads. In this, it has a distinctly American flavor. American culture foregrounds the issue of choice itself, regardless of the results. Captain Ahab pursues the white whale, not at the direction of a god or a king, but at the bidding of a choice inflated into mania. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is haunted by the fact that one of its main characters, Jim, is legally unable to choose, and yet does so anyway. Casablanca builds toward Rick's climactic choice while suggesting that even the personal decisions of a hard-drinking, heartbroken club owner are intertwined with political actions that affect millions. It's a way of thinking that flows naturally from the United States' earliest history. Here is John Adams writing to John Taylor in 1814. Liberty, according to my metaphysics, is an intellectual quality, an attribute that belongs not to fate nor chance. The definition of it is a self-determining power in an intellectual agent. It implies thought and choice and power. It can elect between objects, indifferent in point of morality, neither morally good nor morally evil. We want to believe that roads are taken, or not, by a self-determining power that can elect between objects, as Adams puts it. Indeed, the nation's founding assertion that everyone is entitled to the pursuit of happiness assumes that a path can be chosen that will make that pursuit possible. Frost's lines simultaneously embody and undercut these ideas, but the ideas themselves are as American as action movies. It's perhaps ironic, then, that The Road Not Taken was written in England and inspired by the indecisiveness of an Englishman. That Englishman, the poet Edward Thomas, was, as Frost later put it, the only brother I ever had. In 1912, when he was nearly 40 years old, Frost traveled to Great Britain with his family in a last-ditch effort to improve his literary prospects. He was, at that time, almost completely unknown in the United States. He managed to get his work published in London, but it went mostly unnoticed until Thomas, then a prominent literary journalist, declared his second collection one of the most revolutionary books of modern times. The men became good friends afterwards, and Thomas frequently visited Frost at his cottage in Gloucestershire. Throughout 1914, Frost and Thomas regularly took long walks in the woods, and, according to Frost, these conversational rambles formed the basis for The Road Not Taken. In the words of Lawrence Thompson, Frost's biographer, repeatedly, while these two men had botanized in England together, Thomas leading the way through his favorite countryside in the hope of showing his American friend an extraordinary station of rare plants, these ventures had ended in self-reproachful sighs and regrets. Even the most successful of these walks failed to satisfy Thomas's fastidiousness. He blamed himself for having made the wrong choice of location, and would sigh wistfully over the lovely specimens he might have shown if only he had taken Frost to a different place. Frost sent this poem to Thomas soon after he finished it, in early 1915. Britain was at war then, and Thomas had been debating whether or not to enlist. He was troubled and confused by the poem, and might even have read it as a goad. Matthew Hollis argues for this possibility in Now All Roads Lead to France, The Last Years of Edward Thomas. It pricked at his confidence. The one man who understood his indecisiveness the most astutely, in particular towards the war, appeared to be mocking him for it. How free-spirited his friend seemed in comparison. This American who sailed for England on a long shot, knowing no one, and without a place to go, rode his literary fortunes and won his prize, then set sail again to make himself a new home. The road not taken did not send Thomas to war, but it was the last and pivotal moment in a sequence of events that had brought him to an irreversible decision. Thomas joined the British Army shortly thereafter. He was killed 2 years later in the Battle of Arras, while lighting his pipe. So the confusion embedded in The Road Not Taken is mirrored in the love and misunderstanding between its American author and his English friend. If this is an ironic parallel for such a thoroughly American poem, it's also a fitting one. The ideas that the poem holds in tension, the notion of choice, the possibility of self-deception, are concepts that define not just the United States, in all its ambiguity, but the responses that the United States inspires in and from citizens of other countries. There is the admirable self-reliance and the towering egoism, the emphasis on liberty and the thirst for control. There is the grandeur, and there is the hypocrisy. These contradictions come together in the idea of self-determining power that proved fatally compelling for Edward Thomas. This is why it's not so surprising, after all, to see The Road Not Taken used in a 21st-century Ford commercial in New Zealand. The iconic American poem. The iconic American brand. What better pairing to convince a Kiwi that his own self-determining power is central to the life he will lead and the choices he will make, and that this power would be enhanced by the purchase of a Taurus? At the same time, of course, the advertisement itself is an attempt to undermine that power and replace it with the judgment of the advertiser and his client. It is, in one sense, a deception, as is The Road Not Taken. Yet, for all its trickery, no text from the past 100 years better captures the difficult essence of American experience, or more successfully translates that essence into a figure useful to people far beyond the borders of the United States. The Road Not Taken is a literary oddity and a philosophical puzzle. But more than anything else, it's a way of framing the paradoxical and massively influential culture in which it both begins and ends. The chapters that follow will examine these ideas through 4 windows. First, in The Poet, I'll discuss the life of its author, Robert Frost, whose career parallels the reception of his least understood creation. Second, in the poem, I'll focus on The Road Not Taken itself, its origins, its teasing, contradictory lines, and its connections to Frost's later work. Finally, in The Choice and The Chooser, I'll discuss the cultural and philosophical ramifications of Frost and his poem, a journey that should show how 20 short lines can change how we see the world and how the world sees us. The Poet. I began life wanting perfection and determined to have it. I got so I ceased to expect it and could do without it. Now I find I actually crave the flaws of human handiwork. I gloat over imperfection. Look out for me. You, as critic and psychoanalyst, will know how to do that.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?